Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly ag weather update brought to you by Farm Credit and Nutrient Ag Solutions. We're going to start today with some radar imagery early this morning here on Monday, just after the sun rose. And I'm watching here some of the bigger thunderstorm clusters that are just off the east coast of North Carolina. Some of these produce some incredibly heavy rainfall. They were rather slow movers this morning, rolling right into a couple of different parts of North Carolina. And for most of Farm Credit's territory here, this was about the only early morning rain that we had to watch. But I'm starting off on this for two reasons. The first is the storms. The second is I want you to see these little rings that show up. So you'll see some right down here. Watch it again right there. There's another one here near Dunn. And you can actually see them dotted throughout all of North Carolina. What you're actually seeing here is sunrise happening and birds leaving their roost. And we can pick them up on radar. It's kind of neat to see that. Now, one thing I'm going to do before I go away from this is I'm going to show you this kind of a neat bit of software here. It's called Radar Scope. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to take you back to the 19th. And I want to go to, let's go to noon. On the 19th p.m. There we go. And I want to show you a storm that rolled right through, watch this animation here, right north of Raleigh and straight here toward like Rocky Mount and just ripped right over the top of this area. Now, we call this, you can see the overall circulation. Watch it and repeat. See how it's spinning? We call this a mesoscale convective system. It's actually called a mesoscale convective vortex. And it was relatively small in its size. But what was important about it is at the very end of the animation, see this thing rolling across here, spinning up. We did notice that it began to produce a really well-defined hook echo on its back side. And as it rolled right here, take a look. This was the location last week on the 19th of the tornado report. And I wanted just you to see the size of that hook echo on the backside. So when you kind of watched a lot of the news reports about the damage here, meteorologically, this is what we were seeing. This is a very well-defined hook echo, and there's a tornado sitting right on the inside of this. So this was a pretty rough go of it in terms of severe weather. Now we look back over the last week and we just say how much rainfall did we get in total, and there were some places across North Carolina, especially again this morning, that saw some heavy rains. But come over here to the border between North and South Carolina, or down here to coastal South Carolina. Even southern Georgia last week saw some very, very heavy rainfall. And there's a lot of flooding here on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains into Tennessee, into Kentucky as well. So this map is just important to kind of take in to set up the context of what I want to show you both nationally and then throughout Ag South's territory here. Hail, just wanted to point this out. Some of the storms over the weekend did produce some pea-size, couple of places picking up some penny-size hail in both Georgia and South Carolina here with some of the storms that rolled through. But as it stands early this morning, those storms are finally getting offshore. This is just some of the latest lightning data I've got from blitzertongue.org, one of my favorite sites. And one of the things we have to watch this entire week is how the flow is going to set up to deliver more storms into parts of the Carolinas, into Georgia. I think it's going to be limited, but we're not shutting off the moisture and we're not shutting off the potential for storms. And that's going to be important for our quick discussion here in a few moments about drought. So again, this is just live look at storms this morning, really nasty ones coming out of Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas. But here's our lightning early this morning. Okay, satellite data is going to tell the story. Here's the sunrise across the country this morning. So a lot of low cloud hanging around early. Here's the storms just offshore, but I need to go back to Sunday to really make my story here because the flow pattern was set up something like this. Now you see as I rock back and forth, I need you to see two things. This is a large ridge over the west. This is wildfire smoke coming in on northwest flow. And you can see right along the Gulf Coast how the flow is setting up, just paralleling it. See that? And that particular setup is going to be one we're going to watch the evolution of all week because this larger ridge that's here is going to be opening itself up into the midsection of the country, bringing in a lot of heat to the Corn Belt. What we need to know is the duration of that. How does it set up the flow for the southeast? What's going on in the tropics? And then what's the new longer range outlook given we've seen these mid-summer shifts in the pattern? This is the first really big ridge I've seen setting up here. Summer type ridge in the west, and that's going to influence our patterns. By the way, again, this is just all wildfire smoke, so we do have some of that mixing in early this morning here over North Carolina, which is, if you got up and saw the sunrise, you probably saw a bit of a haze to it. Okay, step back. Let's get some perspective on this. First, I wanted to show you the latest NDVI data for Georgia, North and South Carolina. So all three states combined, you're looking down here at the graph on the bottom. Black line is average. You want to be on the higher side of this. That would indicate better plant health as viewed from space. Where we currently sit is just a hair above where we were in 2022 at this point. All right, we're still very much near the top of the distribution. And Overall, for most of Ag South's territory here, we've gotten good thunderstorm activity this summer, and we've steered clear of drought. Our newest drought monitor, which was released back on the 20th, only shows one little area here that's in drought in North Carolina. Most of the rest of the region, even though there's been a couple of pockets that have been drier as of late, I'll show you those in a second, we are not in drought. This has not been a situation this summer where high pressures just dominated the area and we've had drought as a result. It's not there. And I'll show you in a few moments that there isn't forecast for drought to develop. It's kind of an ongoing narrative we had, but here's our latest update just on the national picture. Now, I do understand when I look back over the last 30 days that there are pockets in through here that have been drier, but we know what just came through into this area, some heavier rains. We had some heavier rains over the weekend down here in southern Georgia. And so therefore, this 30-day window shows the dryness early in the time period, but it's not there now. We've recently seen very heavy rains in much of the southeast, okay? So I mentioned just overall around the rest of the country real quick, we are very hot, very dry in this part of Texas. We will continue to see big storm clusters rolling through here. There's going to be northwest flow delivering storms to the Midwest, even though the heat's coming in. The west is going to continue to get hotter in the southwest, but there's some cooler weather coming into the western United States, but I don't see it going wet for the western United States in the forecast as well. So I wanted to give you that quick trip around the country to give you some perspective on this. But this is what I wanted to get to. The Climate Prediction Center released at the end of last week their newest projections for drought risk from now through October 31st. And while they expect improvement in the drought that's ongoing in the Midwest, they expect it to get worse in parts of Texas and the Four Corner States and worse in the Pacific Northwest. But as you know here, there's no projected drought development for us in the Southeast. And so we need to ask ourselves, why is that the case? And is there good evidence for this? And we're going to come back to some long-range forecasts at the end of this video. Okay, in the near term, what's really important to see is this line graph. Now, this box and whisker plot on top of this line tells me the probability or the odds of keeping the pattern going in the direction I'm about to explain to you. This is called the PNA, Pacific North American Oscillation. Okay, so we usually just use the first three words here, the PNA. Now, it is currently positive. It's expected to dip negative and then really jump back up positive again. So here we go. We're just following it down. It bottoms out toward the end of the month, and then it just shoots back up here again to begin August. Now, what does this mean? This represents a western United States ridge. This represents a central United States ridge. And this represents a western United States ridge. Did you notice I didn't talk about the East Coast? That's because our pattern will be largely influenced by what happens to our west. And at this point, we expect heat to expand toward us over this week. But while the PNA is going negative, it's not staying there. And we see here by the end of the month, it's expected to projected to go back to positive, which means the heat's going to go back into the western United States. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Here it is. This is a forecast of the trough ridge pattern. And what you notice is that by Wednesday and Thursday, what had been a large ridge here opens up into this direction. And the flow pattern kind of comes around the top like this and runs over this ridge. And what we've lost is the depth of the East Coast trough. Now, does it come back? Well, playing through Thursday into Friday and Saturday, we're going to go toward a progressively warmer week overall. A lot of temperatures in the 90s here in the Carolinas and in Georgia. But then by the end of the month, that ridge, which had flexed its way into the Midwest, is now re-engaged back right here. That's the ridge axis. So the flow comes around and over the top and then dives into this deeper trough that's sitting here over Quebec. And that is where we have been for a long time in the month of July. Now, does it last? Well, let's just play out there August 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. I mean, I can just keep going out here. We see the models wanting to keep the ridge to the western part of the United States so the flow comes over it and dies. So what this does is this limits the duration of heat. This reintroduces the chances of us having storms. And then here we are knocking on the door of the most active time period for hurricanes as we get into the month of August. So we got to watch what the tropics is going to do as well. Now, today is kind of an interesting day because, let's see if we got an update here. They didn't change it. Okay, so this is the first day since June the 8th where we have not had a storm prediction center map with at least a slight risk of severe storms on it. First day since June the 8th. We are watching nasty storms this morning, but the forecast for the remainder of the day is we do have isolated storms coming through us today. You can see that tomorrow, a little bit farther to the north, and then we get into the day 3, which would be the 26th, and we're going to watch a complex of storms rolling through the Midwest that could make their way over the Appalachian Mountains and be influential here. Now, no model is going to get this right. In fact, our high-resolution models always struggle in summer. All models do. That's just what happens with convection. But starting off early this morning, here's our storms leaving the East Coast. Now, I'll just play through the day today, and what you'll notice is that by 5 o'clock this evening, we will see isolated storms throughout much of our territory here. Then we play into the overnight hours, and then we get into the next day, Tuesday. And once again, isolated storms. Could there be a front that tries to come through here, possibly into Virginia? But there's just a lot of isolated thunderstorm activity early this week. And then we'll just keep an eye out later on the storms that come through the Midwest and how they could get over here, but they're not being well represented in the models. Now, because of the isolated nature of the storms we're going to be experiencing, you'll notice that much of the next 7 days here, it's not overly wet for us. We can see that there will be pockets of storms in this region, but it's not as though we're just bringing in a deluge of rain. We don't have a front that's going to park itself over us and provide the lift. So along the coast, there will be pop-up storms. Some of them could very well produce some strong straight-line winds and some smaller hail. But overall, this pattern is dominated by flow that's trying to do this. Ridge riding storms over the top, this ridge that flexes and opens up into the mid part of the country for the near term, and therefore we just aren't in the perfect setup to deliver too wet conditions. Now, another way to look at it is just to go to one of our operational runs. I love the European model. It's the highest statistical performer. And so what do we see? Well, much of that was this morning, okay? And then we're just going to watch the potential for some of these storms to run over the top of that ridge getting toward us. Now, you could get completely missed this entire week with precipitation, and you may have some friends or colleagues, nearby farmers, that they get hit with some of these isolated storms. But it's at the end of this animation that I really wanted to show you here from the European model of one feature to be on the lookout for. You've probably seen it as well. Watch the precipitation amounts come up right along this arrow once we get out there about the end of this week going into the weekend. You start to see heavy rainfall offshore. Now, what's important about this is that the models are attempting to develop low pressure, almost tropical-like low pressure just off the coast. And we're going to talk more about the tropics in just a few moments, but it is showing up in the ensembles as well. So you can see the very heavy precipitation here. And what this is actually rolling around is higher pressure that's trying to return into this area. We have not seen that at all this summer, but it's trying to get there. But the map I've been drawing over is the chance, the probability in the next 10 days of getting an inch. A lot of this was this morning. And what you have going forward is lower probabilities of heavy rainfall amounts outside of those convective pockets, the daily thunderstorms. Now, if you're a corn and soybean farmer here, pay attention to this. The models have increased the chances of getting storms rolling through the Midwest, the upper Midwest, and the northern plains throughout this week. And because of that big ridge that opens and then retreats, we're going to expect to see that. Big storms coming into Colorado as well. But let's go ahead and flip this over and talk about the downside risk of this. Who's going to be dry? So I want you to look for the deepest shades. That's where our highest probabilities are of seeing very little precipitation overall, save a stray thunderstorm event. And you notice that it's really going to be hitting much of the cotton belt pretty hard here going forward. Much drier throughout the cotton belt. All right, when we think about is there moisture in this, I'd love to show this animation. We're just going to play through a 10-day time frame. And we're just watching to see if there is going to be Atlantic moisture or Gulf moisture trying to get into our area. And what it's showing you here in the color shading is just the chance of getting at least 1.5 inches of liquid stuffed into the atmosphere that could precipitate out. It's called precipitable water. So this is why I still think there will be isolated storm events, even though we don't have the triggers to give us big storm events that cover more areas. We've got moisture in the atmosphere. So unfortunately, this means kind of a hot and humid setup as we go forward. Now, our longer range forecast models looking at there at week 2. They do have, as I showed you, a larger area in through here that is drier. That's the European forecast. The GFS is always too dry in this area, so I don't want to look at it right now. I really want to focus on this. But I will note that the CPC, our Climate Prediction Center, really only has one area at risk of being drier than average. And I think what they're making a play on here is the fact that, as I just showed you, the moisture will be in the atmosphere. It will pop, which means this is not one of those situations where we're at risk of having flash drought develop up in parts of Ag South's territory. But I want to let you know some places will get missed throughout this week. Now, what we have to ask is how intense will the heat be, and will that really crank up our evaporation rates to make problems? Because so far through the month of July, we have had some hotter temperatures along the coast, but in the interior, we've really stayed away from long duration extreme heat. It's mostly been south or in Texas or in the Four Corner States or in the west. And as this ridge opens up and hits the midsection of the country here, this is going to change in a big way. I mean, it's been cool compared to normal for so many throughout this large section of the country here. So what do we have going on? Well, this is, let's get a new update on this. This is this morning, about 6:35 this morning Central Time, 7:35 your time. And we're looking here at the all hazards weather map. Now, we expect to see this shade in through here, which represents a heat advisory, really begin to open up throughout the rest of the week in this area. And to show you what these temperatures are going to do, this is today's temp. So we're a little cooler because of the morning cloud cover and the precipitation. But look at the heat to your west. By Tuesday, we're already back up into the low 90s. And that's normal. We expect that this time of year. But in parts of the Midwest, coming out of Texas all the way to Minnesota, this whole region here could see triple-digit heat by Wednesday into Thursday. And we're going to stay, generally speaking, in the low 90s. A lot of 92s actually being forecast for this area. This is getting into Friday and Saturday. So we knew that the heat was going to be building after today. But to be honest, these are not crazy temperatures for us. I mean, we expect this kind of thing this time of year. But then as we get toward the weekend, we notice that the extreme heat fades in the midsection of the country. As we just stretch this out there even further, we're going to watch the impacts of that extreme heat back off as well. What am I talking about? Well, over the next 7 days, there's going to be an area that kind of builds right in through here where evaporation rates out of Texas into the plains and Midwest could climb up there above 2 inches, in some places well above 3 inches. But I don't think it hangs on. Our evaporation rates are right about normal. That's what we'd expect. About 1 inch to 1.5 inches a week is pretty common for us. But take a look at what the temperatures do. Here's the heat building over the next 5 to 7 days. And now watch. This is out there, the 5 days ending on August the 3rd. This is what the first almost week of August looks like. Notice, you saw the heat kind of pressure, the risk go down. In fact, it was like that for much of this part of the country, and the heat goes back into the west. That's when the P&A pattern goes back positive, and that's why we see this going on out here. So that's kind of your next 2 weeks in terms of temperature and precip. We're cooler today. We warm up for the rest of the week. Isolated storms are possible with this pattern. No major disruptive, stalled out fronts that cause flooding, but we will have pockets that are actually going to miss a lot of rainfall this week. That's it. That's what I've got for you. Now, the longer term begins with a quick discussion about the tropical season. Let's see if we got a new update here. We don't. This is the 2 a.m. update from the National Hurricane Center. They've kept the system that we watched all last week coming across the Atlantic still at a 20% chance of forming. But I want to show you what this system's kind of chewing on here. There's a lot of Saharan dust going across the Atlantic right now. And some of that Saharan dust will make it into the south. We will get some of it here late this week coming over us in the Carolinas and Georgia. Not a whole lot in this, just some feldspar from the Saharan desert. But I want to show you this, because over the next 10 days, this is the current system, gets into the Caribbean, doesn't likely come into the Gulf. We always watch systems in the Gulf because they can make the turn, not seeing it with this. We have another system behind it that could form, but given the position of the Bermuda High hanging out somewhere here, it looks as though that anything that forms gets turned. And remember, we saw late this week the chance for some tropical low pressure development just off our coast, but it's expected to miss North Carolina and roll out into the North Atlantic. But this is the beginning of what we anticipate now to be a very active season. And I'm going to show you the latest update from Colorado State University, some of the best in the business for doing seasonal hurricane forecasting. When you look at this, let me just draw a line here. Average is on the right-hand side of this line. The current year is on the left. In terms of number of named storms, they upped this. It was earlier around 14 to 15. That would be close to average. It's now at 18. Named storm days, 90 versus 69 being the average. Hurricanes, 9, 7.2 is average. Hurricane days, well above average. Major hurricanes, 4, 3 is normal. And major hurricane days, 9, 7 is normal, or 7.5, 7.4. But this last one is the one I want to keep an eye on, the accumulated cyclone energy. This talks about the duration and strength of these systems. This earlier in the year was projected to be 125. It's now up to 160. And some of the big reasons for that is we've just continued to see these ocean temperatures out here in the Atlantic not only just stay warm, but get warmer in places. I've covered many times how warm the conditions are here in the Gulf Coast. Watch this animation going through the end of June and July here. They've been well into the 90s, some places almost hitting 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the big story that we've been kind of following here lately is look back in June and early July, how cool the water was here off the Canadian Maritimes in the Northeast. And then here in the last about 10 days, this has gone very, very hot. One of the big reasons for that is we watched a larger high pressure cell sit in this area. The winds got quite stagnant. It stopped kind of the coupled system between the ocean and the atmosphere, keeping the cooler water upwelling. And we just got hot. It got hot in this area. It blasted with a bunch of sun and stopped the trade, or not the trade, excuse me, but the wind, prevailing wind direction in this area from letting the cooler water upwell. So we are seeing this. I don't yet know how this is going to influence the pattern. I got to watch that all week, but I wanted you to keep an eye on those very, very hot ocean temperatures forming right in this part here at the end of July. Okay, let's stretch this out even farther. We did get a new update from the CPC. This is now their forecast for August 5th through August 18th. And I'll be honest with you, the pattern that they've come up with here is fully bid into El Nino. Now, up until this point in the year, El Nino has not fully engaged in this pattern. We've had a positive Southern Oscillation Index. That's got to be negative. We've not seen the MJO move around. It needs to if we're going to have El Nino. It needs to get out there into the Pacific Ocean. We've seen the jet stream favor more big ridges west, and that's not necessarily an El Nino look. We haven't had any subtropical component to the jet to speak of for much of this summer. And while that's not uncommon, it's something that we typically see with El Nino. And seeing an active start to a hurricane season, that's not El Nino like either, nor is the low wind shear values we've been measuring. So all of that is just to tell you, when I see the CPC give me this forecast, which is hot south, hot west, and then normal precip or above normal for much of our area and even throughout the central United States, this is a very El Nino-like longer range forecast. And I want to compare this to the latest update from the European model. So I tell you what, instead of going here, let's go to the 30-day forecast for precipitation anomalies. And from now to September 1st, you just don't see the risk of drought developing in our area. And the model's even backed off on the drought risk that was happening throughout the Mississippi Basin as well. But I do want to do one thing here. So let's go to Oceanic View. Let's go to Atlantic Basin View. There we go. And I want to take note of what you're seeing in this area. Do you see how these wet conditions are forecast? I think this has a lot to do with the position and strength over the next 30 days of the Bermuda High. It hangs out between Bermuda and the Azores. And you notice the warm colors north of it, that represents where the high pressure cell is higher than normal. Now, why I'm telling you this is because this could mean any potential system that forms here will likely make the turn before getting to the East Coast overall. But what we'll be watching is anything to come out of the Gulf and come at us in this direction. So I just want to let you know this hurricane season has really piqued my interest as to how it's going to evolve given the very hot ocean temperatures and the position of the Bermuda High. But let's go out and just keep looking out here longer. Next, this is the Southern Oscillation Index I mentioned a moment ago. It's been increasing. That's not an El Nino signal, but over the last few days, we've seen it start to drop. Now, if you continue to hear me next week talking about this going down farther and farther and farther, then that's actually a signal that we are going to be seeing El Nino-like behavior really showing up in the pattern. And we've now seen the newest update from the Climate Prediction Center in NOAA suggesting that we have a better than 96% chance of having El Nino from now all the way through winter and probably lasting into next spring. So when do we start to get that flavor of things? And what does that flavor of things mean? Well, let's finish it up with a longer range outlook. This is the newest 1 month update. This is the month of August as forecast by the Climate Prediction Center. So we already saw the middle of August. This is the whole of August. They've got above average precip for us. They got us hotter than normal, but above average precip. That's El Nino-like. We then come over here and say, what about your 3 month outlook? So this is August, September, and October. They continue to show, They continue to show the reduced risk of drought development. Hot, but reduced risk of drought development. And if you come to the site, CPC, and you come up here and just click on 3 month outlook, you can actually be taken to their official model forecasts. And if we just might as well go look later in the season, what about the precipitation patterns here for October, November, December. They've actually got a wet forecast for us during that time frame as well. And if we even go out there, might as well look at winter just to do it. They've got wet along the southern tier of the U.S., and that is El Nino to the T. So I started this whole discussion off with, we've avoided drought on a big scale. We seem to continue to avoid it, even though we're going to have some hotter, drier conditions in the near term. But the longer range forecast is not for drought to develop. If that changes, I will keep you informed. All right. So I appreciate a little bit extra attention this morning. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.